Good afternoon. My name is Youmna Naufal. I'm a journalist here based in Beirut. Welcome to a special partnership between UNESCO and the Chidiac Foundation, and an even more special panel today titled Access to Information, the Investigative Tool for Journalists. You know, we talk about journalists and freedom of the press, but in our region and still in the world, journalists still struggle to get access to information. And there are still a lot of organizations and institutions out there that don't know that it is a right for journalists to ask for information, for photos, for videos. It is important to note that journalists have always played a central role in initiating and stimulating public debates and making sure that the message gets out there to the public. Of course, it's become a little more challenging with social media because today everybody can be a journalist. There are pros and cons to that specific fact. And with us today to discuss this are four esteemed speakers, all experts in their own fields and all veteran journalists. And I'm going to introduce you to them today. I'm going to introduce you to the man who is socially distancing but sitting right across from me, George Eid. The Chidiac Foundation, just a quick note, was founded by a veteran journalist herself, Chidiac, a survivor, and an incredible, incredible woman that always puts freedom of the press at the forefront, and specifically in Lebanon. George Eid is an international multilingual correspondent, anchor, and member of the International Investigative Reporters and Editors Organization. Hello, George.
Hello.
He has worked for several outlets, including Voice of Lebanon and Sky News Arabia, where he reported on several humanitarian and socio-political issues and is known to tackle taboo and delicate subjects. I will be asking him about those today. He was among the first teams to enter Aleppo as a reporter with Sky News Arabia in 2012 and covered the Syrian war in terms of its humanitarian perspective. Across the screen from me, I have Rawan Damen. Rawan, I can't see you. Are you there?
Yes, I am, and I can see your studio fantastic, and George and Pierre on the other side.
Hi, Rawan.
Hello, how are you?
Nice to have you here, social distancing style. How are you doing with COVID and everything?
As the whole world coping.
Where are you joining us from today?
From Amman, Jordan.
All right.
Oh.
Rawan is Director General of the Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalism. She's a filmmaker and a media consultant with over 20 years of experience in media coaching and management, in addition to TV and digital production her career. She was also a senior commissioning producer at Al Jazeera Media Network for 10 years, commissioning 250 hours of documentaries and investigations. A lot of information there today. Welcome, Rawan.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Pierre, Haski. Pierre, I don't know if you recall, we've actually met when COVID was not as big as it was today to talk about journalism
yes,
as well.
Absolutely, and I have great memory of the conference. Was it 2 years ago?
Yeah, it was a few years ago. Are you joining us from France today?
Yes, I'm in Paris.
All right.
Rainy and COVID-stricken Paris.
I hope you're keeping safe. Thank you for joining us. Pierre Haski is a French journalist, the co-founder of Rue 89. He was deputy editor of Libération from January 2006 till his departure in 2007 from the Daily. He started his career in 1974 as a journalist for the Agence France Presse and was its correspondent in South Africa from 76 to 80. He then joined the staff of the Daily Libération in 1981. At first responsible of the Africa section, he was then charged to its diplomatic section, and he went on numerous international assignments, corresponding from South Africa, Jerusalem, and China. Welcome, Pierre. Thank you for joining this it's a very important topic, and I was surprised when I was doing my research at the sheer title, right? Access to information. Surprised to learn that till this day, journalists still struggle to get access to information. You would think it's a given because of all the information out there, but it's not. And I don't know who wants to start and who wants to take this question first. Shall we go with ladies first? Usually the law does not require that you mention that you have access to information, Rawan, but today it's still a challenge. Can you tell us a bit about, having dealt and having worked in news, your experience with the challenge to information, to getting the right information out there?
Yes, Arab journalists have really serious challenges in the access to information. Like in Tunisia and in Jordan, there is laws that protect the access to information to the journalists. But in reality, the application of that is very problematic. So for ARIJ, Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalism, in 2020 applied in Jordan only 22 times for different ministries, from Ministry of the Health to the Justice to the Prime Minister Office, for access to information of specific statistics or information, reports, studies. And only from the 22 times, we have got a reply 4 times. And in the 4 times, we didn't even get the information we needed. So most, like 80% of the times, there's no reply, although the law itself gives journalists the mandatory for the governmental bodies to reply to our requests within 30 days. So basically, this is not connected to the news. It's connected to the in-depth reports, the investigations, to the programs, to the people who can really wait for 30 days for the replies. And basically, all over the world, you get, especially, let's say, in France, the access to information for journalists, something in the Arab world that is very rare. If you talk about Yemen or Egypt, even DHL we send to the different institutions, because we send it with registered, mail or DHL to make sure they receive it, they never reply. And we write in our reports, then we approach these bodies and we gave them the 2 weeks and they never replied.
They don't reply because I think politics enters the game at this point. Obviously, when we talk about the Arab world, and George can tell us a little bit about his experience covering in Syria, when you talk about the Arab world on so many levels struggles with not only access to information, but getting correct information and factual information to the public. And a case in point, George, is Syria.
Exactly.
So your experience with the challenges to getting information when you were covering Syria?
Well, it's not as transparent as one might think. And before going to Syria, even in Lebanon, which had a small amount of stability for some years, it wasn't easy to reach information. Okay, they will tell you we're working on laws that will give you information. Actually, in Lebanon, we have updated the laws. But try and go and ask a minister for any log. They have even went to the extent of burning some files in the ministries in Lebanon. When you burn something out and you throw it out, even how they deal with some files. Actually, as I was driving here, I passed next to a governmental building. Okay, we had an explosion in Beirut on the 1st of August, but if you see how they lay the files there, they are meant to be destroyed by natural means,
Don't forget there was a fire after that explosion as well.
Exactly. So
it
is the attitude first. It is the corruption first and foremost. And then they will, I remember a story a journalist in USA told us at the International Convention for Investigative Reporters. He told me, yes, we have freedom of expression. I was just envious. I told him, why you have access in the US and we don't in Lebanon? So he just said, yeah, I tried to ask for an information once and I got 4 trucks loaded with paperwork and they tell me, you need this paper, just go and look. Among the tons of paper, he had to look maybe for years. He didn't do it eventually because they overloaded him with information, so he won't get the information
because
he needs.
The legality of the system. And I have introduced 3 of our esteemed speakers. And last but not least, I'm introducing a colleague of mine, a Lebanese journalist and documentary producer director with 28 years of experience. Miss Diana Moukalled is with us today. She is known for covering hot zones and writing and producing story in the Middle East. Her war coverage includes Lebanon, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Yemen, to name a few. She's also produced and directed documentaries. And along with 2 other founders in 2017, Diana launched Daraj.com, an independent media platform that addresses controversial issues that are underreported in the Arab region. She is here to share her experience with us today. Welcome, Diana. And again, a warm welcome to George Eid, Rawan, Damen, and Pierre, Haski. Now that we all have you, let me just quickly update you on what we were talking about, just to kind of resume it. We were talking about the challenges that still exist today when it comes to the laws that allow journalists to get access to information. And Rawan was talking about her experience George mentioned what he was doing in Syria as well, before Syria as well, even in Lebanon sometimes, and comparing it to people that live in developed nations such as the US and France. This is where Pierre Haski comes in, saying that you would expect things to be easier in developed nations, but that is not always the case. Just because they are developed doesn't mean they are transparent. And I believe you can come in on this, Diana, since you also have reported on issues that are underreported in the region, and then I'll ask a question to all our speakers again. Can you share some of the challenges that you have faced when you were reporting on specific issues that are not constantly transparent in the region?
Look, I have to tell you that some of my very hard got stories did not find their way to be broadcasted. I reached the borders of Chechnya. I went to Yemen just 2 months after Houthis got over Sana'a. I have at least 3 to 4 major stories. And I'm not saying about the article, I'm saying about field work, going there, filming, doing stories. And journalistically speaking, they are really acceptable, if not more. And unfortunately, due to political reasons, due to editorial limitations, they did not find their place on to be broadcasted. So this is one example of so many other examples. But comes to my mind what happened in 2016, and that was the main reason that pushed me and my partners to launch Daraj. Is when the first bunch of Panama Papers got out. Mm-hmm. If you recall, when these papers come out, it's a leak. It's a leak for how politicians, leaders all over the world, and definitely Arab world is included, try to evade their money and having their fortunes offshore.
Yeah, their taxes.
At that time, if you look at the Arab media, you can find rarely that someone has published the whole bunch of Panama Papers. You can find one media outlet publishing a story that affects the opponent or those who are others, but not the one that affects the main country or the main source of certain group. But you will not find, like we see today, the whole story of Panama Papers 1 or 2 or Paradise Papers or any serious investigative report that fully covered. So since then, we thought that it's about time will bring more freedoms, and actually it did in the first few months. Unfortunately, later on with the counter-revolution, the ceilings went lower and the polarization took everything on its way. So you find the media was extremely polarized more and more after 2011, and the space and what we used to be able to say relatively before 2011, it became more difficult and sometimes impossible after 2011. So with that polarized situation, with what happened with Panama Papers, we thought it's about time to launch a moderate platform trying to at least have a space and publish what should be published and cover the region properly.
Go ahead.
Just to cut the story short, it's the polarized media, among other problems that you have mentioned. It could be laws, it could be culture, but I'm saying about media owned and divided upon those who are in power, whether they are leaders, kings, autocrats, religious parties. They control the media and they control the narrative and they control how we approach serious stories, mainly investigative stories.
I want to add to what you said and open the discussion to our other panelists, because we're, this is such a large topic and a wide topic, and we won't be able to cover everything. But I do want to ensure that we build on what Diana said, and eventually I want to get to fake news, citizen journalism, and of course social media and how it opened the world to all kinds of information going everywhere. Pierre, Rawan, and George, Diana mentioned something very important. She said, when it comes to information relating to sensitive issues can be corruption, organized crime, environmental contamination, relationships with business or lobby groups, many factors that will hinder the access to information, whether in a developed nation or in an underdeveloped nation. How do you tackle that? How have you specifically, and anybody can take this question, tackled getting to the information within your job or capacity? Not all at the same time. Pierre, you want to go first? You're
Okay, as I was saying, in my experience, I've been stationed in countries that had very authoritarian governance, like China or South Africa during apartheid. And my experience is that you will always have people within the system who want the truth to come out one way or another. And I think that's a kind of universal rule that there are always people who, faced with incredible injustice or oppression, will want the truth to come out. And then starts the hard work, which is to get access to the information, confirm it, build the case, build your story, or build your investigation without compromising your source or compromising other people, and get it published. So it's a long process, but certainly I think we are in a world, and both the political and the technical tools are there, where each time you have a wall, there's a way of going past that wall, and it's a big challenge for journalists, but I think it's a very worthy challenge. One topic we were discussing while you were cut off was the fact that in this era of social media, investigative journalism is a very major issue for bringing back legitimacy to journalism and to restore fact-based debates. And definitely what Diana said about the polarization post 2011 is a world problem. It's not.
Yeah. She mentioned it when it comes to the Arab world specifically, because she was mentioning the Arab Spring. But it is true. It is true. You find it.
Look at the US.
Look at that's. I was just thinking about that. You took the words out of my mouth. When you think about, and we saw this polarization in the United States with the 2016 elections, and now we're seeing it again. I mean, it's been very, very in the forefront for the last 4 years. When you think about the polarization of the media, I think it has to do with how divisive a country can be, but also, and I think Jana mentioned this, powerful groups own a lot of the narrative, unfortunately. Powerful groups, political groups. George, I see you nodding. I'm guessing it's also because of the situation we have in this country, because whatever is applicable in the United States or France is also applicable in this country. What do you have to add to that, Jana and Pierre, what they were saying?
Applicable times 10, of course, in Lebanon, because we are in deep with this system. So in Lebanon, it is hard to get out of the system when you're looking for information. But I have to really second what Pierre said. There are always people who are whistleblowers. There are others who are willing to give information. And one of the things that I have found useful in Lebanon is the political polarization that we have. So mainly political parties hate each other at some point when they're not allies.
So you use that.
So using that is to our benefit. Everyone wants to expose the other. Of course, the information you get from one political party has to be looked with scrutiny and with a lot of details, because you never know what they're launching at you or what they're giving you.
It's propaganda.
Yeah, we have to weigh it. You know, they're always. Everyone has his own agenda. So it's a thin line between getting you the information you want and doing someone else's agenda. So basically we have to get the feed from the person and check it, double check it, get our own sources inside the system, inside the official Lebanese state, because sometimes I had to get the information I wanted through a person I knew that he worked for a governmental entity. So I had him search for a few info, but there is this limitation of fear. You know, people fear sometimes being discovered, and this could cost them their lives, this could cost them even their jobs. So this is something to consider in Lebanon. To add to what already people face outside of the boundaries of Lebanon, we have this element that is security. And we've seen people disappear in Lebanon because they found something that would jeopardize a military group. And we do have a good bunch of military groups in Lebanon that do not want information to be exposed.
And this is, you know, it's so sad when you hear this, because this is a truth in Lebanon, in Turkey, in different parts of the world. When we talk about freedom of the press, when we talk about people disappearing in their quest for truth and in their research for truth. And then I wanna bring it to you, because George mentioned that, you know, journalists have to deal with propaganda and they have to deal with agendas, right? Because everybody has an agenda. This is true for Lebanon and beyond. You know, as Director General of the Arab Reporters for Investigative Journalism, and, you know, when you're dealing with Arab states, you realize that on a wider scale, agendas are prevalent everywhere, and they are sometimes divided among sectarian lines, religious lines, something Jana said. What can you tell us about that and having to navigate that to get the truth out?
I think the best thing is to be ethical and objective when you deal with your stories. You will always have different people who would like you to take you this way or the other way. And sometimes the victim survivors, they want you to not do the confrontation with the person, the factory, the system, the regime that is causing the harm. And in our professional investigative work, we always say we want to hear from everybody and do the confrontation with everybody and get them the right to speak up and say why this was done and why and when and how and where. So it's not difficult to be an objective investigative journalism based on the facts and the ethics you work on. The problem in the Arab world that when you publish those stories, it's very sensitive to publish them. And this is why in many, many cases, for the last 5 years, most of the Arab journalists prefer when they work on sensitive investigations not to mention their names. So we don't know exactly who did this investigation. And in some very sensitive stories, we even in ARIJ decided not to mention our name. And we gave those investigations to the Liberation, the BBC, Guardian, to protect ourselves and the journalists. It's not easy to produce investigations in the Arab world and real ones, but we are continuing because of the courageous Arab journalists. Even, you know, you mentioned the disappearance. In Egypt, for example, there is over 100 people in the last 5 years, and disappears means they never, we don't know what happened to them. This is a story, for example, that, you know, many journalists in Egypt, we train them to use the highest digital security, physical security to protect them, their resources, their sources, and their stories. It's not enough to be courageous. You need to be protected, know exactly why you are doing this and what you are doing this to succeed. And you need the critical mass of the people to get their stories the impact they need. I think it is not rare in the Arab world. There is a lot of places that have same problems in Latin America, in Africa, in East Asia, and even in the West with the bombardment of the fake news, misinformation, disinformation.
We're gonna get to that.
Easier, but I think only last week there was the publishing of the Fencent files. I'm sure all of you followed this, and we and Daraj, even with Diana, partnered on one story on Iraq. ARIJ published 5 different stories with ICIJ, BuzzFeed, and leaks from the Fencent. And this proved that the investigative international community is alive. we can do things together with cross-border collaboration if we work hard and to provide the truth. It's not easy, but it's doable.
Can I just?
Yes, go ahead, Pierre. Please go ahead.
George was talking about people disappearing, and I think maybe that's my role in this panel to recall that it's not because you have a free system like we are supposed to have in Europe that these things end. And we had at least 2 journalists murdered in Europe, within the European Union in the past couple of years. One in Malta, Daphne Caruana Galizia, and one in Slovakia, Jan Kuciak and his girlfriend were murdered. And in both cases, these were investigative journalists. Daphne was working on the local follow-up of the Panama Papers. And one day she goes into her car and boom, there's a bomb and she dies. And the important thing, and that's where maybe the legal system of the European Union allows it, is that the family, we as Reporters Without Borders help them tremendously, and we managed to prevent impunity. And that's a very important thing because it's a protection for future investigative journalists. And the Prime Minister of Malta had to resign. His chief of staff is currently in jail. And there's the investigation has shown the political mafia connections that were behind the murder. And the same happened in Slovakia. There was a strong reaction of the civil society, and the current president of Slovakia, she's a lawyer who was elected as a reaction to the murder of Jan Kuciak, which had a tremendous impact on the society. So we need to not to, I understand that sometimes you feel, okay, we have these systems in our countries, when we get rid of them, we'll be free and happy. Yes.
It's a long process. It's a long process.
I
want you to add.
It's a never-ending process.
Go ahead, George. You want to add a few
things? I
things?
More. I followed the 2 stories Pierre is talking about. Thank you for bringing this topic up, Pierre. It satisfies a bit our conscience to know that they didn't avoid impunity. But part also of our problem in Lebanon is that everyone avoids going to taking a sentence, or everyone gets away with his crime, be it legal, it has to do with corruption. I mean, we never had someone pay for his crimes, almost never in Lebanon. We had presidents killed, we had journalists in tens, and the very founder of MCF, Chidiac, who was my tutor at university. I met her after her accident, and they tried to kill her. It's a big thing. I even got threatened in 2010 just for opening up a subject that had to do with the militia, the Shia militia, Hezbollah, buying lands in other areas to use them, as we saw lately, to store weapons. So this was, I got phone calls from different numbers from around the globe and threats. So in Lebanon, we have this, if it bothers you, just eliminate it. It's part of the culture for the last 30 years. And this is how a political faction in Lebanon is winning over the others. This is how the system is working. So I do hope that with the efforts that are being done, your efforts, Pierre, and the efforts of all the journalists in Lebanon and around the globe, we do reach a point where people will think twice in Lebanon before committing crimes and trying to silence journalists, because I've been seeing it for the last 30, 35 years, and others among us today on Zoom might talk about previously, because I'm the younger generation. So for the 30 years I've been there in Lebanon, I've seen it happen over and over without seeing anyone get into jail for that.
I'll re-mention this towards the end, but journalists act as public watchdogs, whether it's for democracy, for the quest for truth, and silencing them, as we've seen. And we've seen this is not a new phenomenon. This is a phenomenon that spanned years. But in Lebanon specifically, and George is right, what we've seen in the last, we can say 15, 20 years easily, is this increase of violence towards journalists. Pierre, you were mentioning kidnapping and murder. This is a kind of a normalized occurrence here, and that's what's crazy. And Diana can add to it, because she has also worked on underreported topics, but it's become almost the norm for impunity to reign, and whoever is going to disagree with a specific political party or a specific agenda or whatnot can easily be silenced. Diana, in your, you've covered different things, but one of the countries that you've covered is Lebanon, and dealing with the socio-political issues in the country, dealing with women, minorities, interests, and sometimes taboo subjects that people don't want to hear about. I just want to get a little bit, of information from you on what you covered that could be sensitive. I think it would be interesting before we get to the big topic of fake news.
I agree on most of what has been said regarding Lebanon. Yes, we have a serious problem in Lebanon, which is impunity. We don't have proper accountability since the end of civil war. We rarely see any official or any murderer or anybody who committed serious crime going to court or really getting accounted for what he or she have committed. So this is a serious problem. But I have to say that relatively, the margin of covering stories, the margin of freedom that we have in Lebanon is still acceptable compared to where we live. Unfortunately, autocracy is a plague. And Lebanon has been affected to what's happening around us, either in Syria, Iraq, Egypt, Turkey, or wherever. And we see a tendency more and more within the authority and those who are in power to follow or to attack or to silence those who speak up, whether through social media or through journalistic stories. And we have seen increasing numbers of those who have been either went to court or questions or sometimes attacked by mobs or by anyone. So yes, we have this trend, but we do have a space where you can speak up. The problem, in my opinion, is the media itself in Lebanon, because ownership of the media is a major problem. We do have a low problem in Lebanon, but still the constitution in Lebanon governs our freedom in covering and speaking what we want. It really depends on which judge, which lawyer you speak to or who supports your story. And this is an issue by itself. Here in Lebanon, due to the complicity of the situation and to the parallel power that controls the country, it's not only the system, it's not only the president, we have armed group, we have militias, we have religious parties, we have so many taboos in Lebanon. But at the same time, if you look, we can speak against them all. To a certain extent, we do face some problems. I got so many attacks and issues because of what we say or what we write or what we express. But still, in Lebanon, we can do this. And I think this is the real fight, not to accept the suppression that we have experienced and we are still experiencing, but we keep protesting. October 17 was a key point in our history. It raised the bar, and we should not accept going backwards again.
I want to interject on this, Jana, because I want to get your opinion on this, and then you can all weigh in. Lebanon, we're entering the 1-year anniversary of the Lebanese Revolution. It changed history forever, and as a journalist, Jana, myself, when I was covering the revolution, even in this revolution, even in how it's being covered, there is divisiveness. There is not one narrative. And exactly. I think this is what becomes a challenge when you're covering stories. When you say we shouldn't go back, what exactly are you referring to moving forward?
Well, the revolution created its own dynamics, its own media, its own social media pages. Protesters didn't wait for mainstream media to cover them when they were accused that they are being paid by embassies. They launched their own defense or not their own narrative. They filmed a video, spoke up of what they say, and they claimed the revolution. So to me, it's not, yes, the mainstream media is an issue. You can notice a trend in the past few months is that most of the media, whenever there's a protester complaining against the army or the president or the leader of Hezbollah, you will find most reporters get to silence those who speak up among protesters. This is something new. This is something that should not be the trend among mainstream media, but it's happening. That's why we find alternative voices coming out and speaking up. And we find also alternative media, Lebanese, going to their own pages and trying to cover the revolution from the perspective that they wanted to be covered.
I think an important thing when we talk about access to information and an investigative tool for journalists, Rawan, I want to finish with you. I know we're running out of time. Because of the sheer nature of how information is spread today and the access to it, there is this increasing problem that we've been talking about for years of fake news and how to discern what is factual and what is not. And what would you say, or what would you advise aspiring journalists when it comes to dealing with that in 2020 and onwards?
Challenge, Youmna, in nowadays, misinformation, disinformation, even the American president is part of the fake news. So investigative journalists need to be trained on verification tools, on fact checking. Every investigator go into a fact checker and a lawyer. Journalist, but himself, the coach, the mentor, the editor, needs to have all the skills and the tools for fact checking and verification, not only for information, but also for images and videos. And we in ARIJ even are launching the Arab Fact Checkers Network as an initiative to gather the fact checkers units and the fact checkers freelancers to work together on this. None of us can combat the fake news, misinformation, disinformation alone, and we need to work together to make it happen.
It's an ongoing problem, and Rawan, I know as Director General of the Arab Reports for Investigative Journalism, another big one is that, I know we should work together to try to surpass it, but what would you say is the one tool needed for journalists today?
No one tool. There is only critical thinking. Mm-hmm. You need very critical and question everything, but you need this wide range of tools to know exactly how to do it professionally and as quickly as possible, and then not to be part of disseminating more fake news via not that this is misinformation, disinformation, or even missing information. Sometimes it's not fake, but it is the context that is wrong or used in a misused way.
Which can lead to propaganda and the misinformation of news. So it's always about, I think what you're trying to say, and add to it, please, if you feel the need to, is that journalists have a role to play in terms of critical thinking, but also you mentioned ethics and responsibly putting information out there by looking at the big picture and the details and considering context.
Yeah, exactly.
Checking several sources. What else?
Just carry the spirit of the victims, survivals, the people you carry the story. You can gather information and maybe there is 10 different ways to present this story, whether written or audio visual, but I claim that there is one spirit that is the spirit of the subject itself and the subjects themselves, the victims, survivors. If you carry that spirit, what you get from you will reach to the audience and the targeted audience. This is very important, and I think we as journalists forget this many times with the loop that we get ourselves with producing and publishing our investigation.
All right. Thank you, Rawan. Thank you for being with us today. George, I want to end with you, because when we're talking about access to information and the rights of journalists, you and I are sitting in the heart of the capital, Beirut, barely a month ago, another explosion. And when you see everything that's happened in Lebanon and the impunity, and that's what our speakers were talking about, the level of impunity, how difficult it is to get to the truth in a country like Lebanon. When you think of where we stand today in 2020 moving forward, where do we go from here as journalists?
Well, I have to be optimistic and rely on the talents, on the people, the new generation, the new blood of Lebanese journalists, because to admit something at the end, Youmna, it's that the problem is at the heart even of the journalists themselves. I do call some of them money bags, you know. They've been too close to politicians that they have gone corrupt themselves. And this is part of our problem. Access to information, if it is given, do we really have journalists who want to go and fetch that information? We do have, but unfortunately corruption has gone so deep in the system in Lebanon that we have journalists, and we can have a lot at the top of our mind, who are close enough to politicians that they don't want to hurt them anymore. They don't want to expose them anymore. They want to act just as propaganda tools. And this is part of our problem as well. On the other side, the system in Lebanon, the militia groups we have, the security issue will prevent some others from exposing the truth out of fear, out of blocked information. I'm going to give you an example. I was working threatening them. I've been there. I know what it's like. It was devastating for my family as well. So recently, about a year ago, I was working on a topic. You know, there is an embargo on Syria. So a man affiliated to Hezbollah just founded a company, a plane company, which was like a Ponzi scheme. It kept selling vacations to everyone. Atlas Group, the name was, and the guy is in jail. So this guy went on to sell these tickets, and then suddenly he went bankrupt. But at the background of the story, as he lay in jail, the planes flew to Syria. They gave them authorization. They flew them out of the country. And then the parts of these planes were given to other planes chartered for Syria. So they were used either as chartered planes for Syria to lift the embargo, because they couldn't get any plane parts or planes to go to Syria from international destinations. So they are using them now under a Syrian company, out of bringing them inside Lebanon and then diverging them to Lebanon. So as I exposed this info, nothing happened. My source was someone from the government, inside the government, a civil servant who really wanted this to stop because he knew something fishy was going on. Even the plane, as it landed, it took emergency permission. And this is only given in case you have someone who's giving birth, in case you have a medical condition, or in case you have something that's wrong with the plane itself. So the whole story of these planes that were diverged to Syria for economic reasons and to lift the embargo was not dealt with in Lebanon. Not even by the system, not even by justice, nothing. This is a small example, and I can surely provide you with more, and you can think of a lot of more examples. So this is Lebanon now.
It's sad when you think about it. If you had to use one word when we talk about the need for a journalist, something that they should have, something that they should be, something that they should aspire towards, one word. What is the role of a journalist in 2020 and beyond, in one word?
Resilience. Resilience.
It's been so overused in this country, and yet it's so important.
Yeah, and we do have to live it. You know, it's just not saying resilience. You do have to be resilient for everything that's around you.
In mind, spirit, and body. I think that's a great way to end it. That's a good word. That's a good word, George. I want to thank our panelists, George Eid, Diana Moukalled, Rawan, Damen, and Pierre Haski for joining us today on this very important discussion, a partnership between UNESCO and the Chidiac Foundation, a panel titled Access to Information, an Investigative Tool for Journalists. I just want to say, covering this for 10 years now and ending on this, George ended it by saying something very important. He mentioned the youth, and he mentioned the new blood. And really, everything that we've seen, whether it's the revolution, whether it's different points in history in Lebanon, the youth really comes forward and takes charge in places where they're not supposed to, but they do it. And they do it without anybody asking them to do it. And I think we all speak the same narrative when we imply and ask these youth to keep doing what they're doing, to do things ethically. We mentioned with Rawan, she said you have to have critical thinking, you have to be resilient, you have to not give up, and most importantly, you have to stay hopeful. And on that note, thank you for today. Good afternoon and good night.